Hi, I'm Sturdy McKee from sturdymckee.com. Today we're going to talk about the two things that are most important I found for your business. So first off, who wants to make money? We all could do with a little bit extra, whether it's paying for our kids' tuition or building reserves for our business or what have you. But what I want to do today is give you a little bit of an idea how to maybe improve your profit and your margins and your bottom line without any additional marketing or additional business or even really additional expenses. So a little bit about me. That's my wife Kathy and me in Mexico. I think this was our first ever trip when the kids were older, of ever being away from our kids together. And so we're happy, we're smiling because we're in Mexico and all inclusive. It was just a weekend, and we've only ever done that, I think, twice. Um, and then there are the kids. They're spring break. They should be smiling bigger because they're not at school, and that's their major complaint in life and the world. Um, but I am a physical therapist by training. Graduated over 20 years ago from PT school. Have had a private practice for about 19 years, all told, and really use the practice as an opportunity to learn more about business and really test things, try things, and we've engaged coaches over the years and other resources and learned a lot and been to conferences and all that stuff. And over the last few years, I've been doing business coaching and advising and really enjoying that and helping business owners. And what I do there is help business owners achieve their vision, figure out their purpose, run their businesses better, improve their profits, and get control over their time and free up some of their time. So that's what gets me going and gets me excited in the mornings. Well, this is your funnel. Okay, so the reason this is here is I've presented this at BPTM Bootcamp a couple times, Breakthrough Physical Therapy Marketing, and they're all there. The people are there to fix their funnel, to make sure their pipeline, their marketing, all that stuff is taken care of, and people are getting through. So they've worked on things like their 7-step killer exam, green ink letters, the workshops. There's Facebook advertising. There are all kinds of ways to get the word out, educate people, content marketing, get leads in and convert them. But then the question is, most of the owners in that kind of venue, they're all doing the work. They're doing everything right. But then the question is their team? Are they managing? Are the rest of the physical therapists, the rest of the people in their teams, are they managing their schedules? Are they ensuring their patients show up? How's their cancel no-show rate going? Are all the therapists billing like they should? And this is true of any business. You might have customers coming into your cafe or people calling to get quotes on your services. But is everybody in the company doing all the things that they need to do to take care of those clients and customers and new leads and all of the rest to make sure you're exceeding expectations consistently across the board? And if the answer to that's even remotely no, then keep listening. So I'm going to show you two things. How even small changes can have amazing and huge impacts on your bottom line. And the one biggest thing I've learned in the last several years working with hundreds of business owners, the one biggest thing to make that happen and to keep it happening. And then the little +1 down there is the you'll get one little bonus on how to keep it from all going off the rails. Once it is working, how do you keep it working? So we're going to use this as our jumping off point, $1 million business, expenses at $900,000, profit $100,000. We're assuming the owners are getting paid something in addition, a salary to this. But if you're an owner, you know that the $100,000 isn't take-home pay. There's reinvestment, there's capital expenses, there's reserve building, there's investing in new employees and hires. A lot of that stuff gets eaten up, and then a lot of the rest of it gets eaten up by taxes. So at the end of the day, you don't have a ton left necessarily, even with these numbers. And again, back to that idea of, we want to pay for our kids' college tuition. We want to make sure we can afford a vacation this year sometime. We want to make sure that those things that, we put everything on the line for, we're actually getting rewarded along the way as well. Part of our context here, though, too, as I go through the rest of this, all this stuff is perfectly scalable up and down. So if you're looking at this and going, well, I only have a $500,000 business, I don't know, then just half it, everything by half. If you've got a $2 million business, double it, quadruple it. $10 million business, 10x. Okay, it's perfectly linear. You'll see how that works in a moment. So we're going to start out with the physical therapist business in the first place, but with visits per case, if you go from 10 to 10.5, and just because this is up here, we'll deal with this first, that's a 5% increase in volume. And again, if you think about cancel no-show rate, unused time of your therapist and clinical staff, I mean, you're paying for all that anyway. That's already a sunk cost. So this is an increase in revenue, 5% of on $1 million is $50,000. This is $50,000. You've already spent all the money hitting your bottom line. So with this one metric, this one change, we can increase your profit margin by 50%. Now, huge disclaimer here, because everybody or somebody who's listening wants to push back and go, well, you're asking me to increase my visits. No, I'm not asking you to prescribe more. I'm not asking you to raise the bar and change the target and tell your therapist they need to treat more. No, what we really, really want to do, though, is ensure that the plans of care that your therapists are writing for, in other words, if they're writing 11 visits per case on average to get people to their goal, be it walk up and down the stairs independently or run a half marathon or play soccer or whatever it might be, that people actually attend and show up for their visits so that they can achieve their goal. If there's a better, more efficient way to get them there, then why isn't that the plan of care? So if they've written the best, most efficient plan of care and they've negotiated with, by the way, and talked with that patient and made sure that's going to fit their timeline, their lifestyle, what they want out of it, the value, the goals and the value they see, we want to make sure people show up. And just as another note here, one patient dropping out after 4 visits can drag this visits per case average down by half a visit. So one patient dropping out after 4 visits can decrease your average for 12 other patients. That's 13 patients that one dropping out early because they didn't see the value, they didn't understand, that isn't really what they wanted, the therapist didn't listen to them, whatever it is, can drag your visits per case average down by half for 13 patients. So think about that. If you have 60 new patients a month and 4 of them drop out early, then you're going to see these kinds of decreases. So again, match up what your therapists are actually writing for their plans of care with patient attendance and make sure people they get it, that you're giving them what they want, that they're achieving their goals, that you're writing and confirming this is the best, most efficient way to get there, and you're telling them that so they understand, and they understand that if it wasn't, you'd be getting them to the right provider. Get that buy-in and watch these numbers, monitor, measure it, make sure it happens, and this is a $50,000 a year increase on $1 million business. Now for billing, sure, there are people out there cheating and what have you, but I have yet to find a staff therapist overbilling. They tend to go the other direction. And if you put checks and processes in place to ensure they're actually billing for all their time, they're billing appropriately and billing for what they do, they're not rounding off the numbers and what have you, then you can see a small increase in the units per visit just through managing and making sure the efficiencies are there. But look at this, a 0.11 unit per visit increase is 3.1%. That's $31,000 in a year. $31,000 from making sure billing is happening correctly. So those two things, those two small changes in this $1 million physical therapist private practice yield $81,000, all to your bottom line. If you have a different kind of business, don't stop. We're going to go into that in a second. But $81,000, again, all to the bottom line. There are no additional expenses associated with this. So we've just increased your profit margin by 80% with two small changes. Now, if you've got a business that isn't a physical therapist private practice, a cafe, for example, or a brew pub or something, and your average sales per customer is $12, and you're able to figure out how to get it to $12.50, either through, think about ways you could do that. Small price increases, offering them a little bit extra, offering them something more. Why do you think McDonald's says, would you like fries with that? Because it turns into millions of dollars. So 12 to 1250 is 4.16% increase. Well, 4% increase, 4.16 on $1 million is $41,600. This is how you cover your child's tuition. Okay, so if you have a $500,000 business, again, $500,000 cafe, that's $20,000 more a year. Is that useful? Now, what if I have like visits per customer per year? I have that brewery or cafe or any kind of transactional place for people to come back. If the average person, my average patron, comes 3 times a year, and that's averaging in the one and dones and the monthly, your regulars and all that stuff, they come 3 times per year. If I can move that number through some kind of loyalty program, through just making people feel welcome and happy, through reminders, social media, mailing lists, anything at all, by 3.3%, 3 to 3.1 visits per year, 3.3% increase, that's $33,000 on $1 million business. Okay, and then finally, we're going to look at revenue per contract. So if you do bigger ticket items, if you can do any kind of an increase or provide more value, and that's huge. You don't just raise prices because you can. You really think about what's the additional value we can provide. What can I do for my clients and customers to make them really, really happy? So if I can figure out a way to change my average contract from $2,000 to $2,100, that's a 5% increase in $1 million business. Again, we're back to $50,000 more a year to the bottom line. Okay, all sounds good. So how do I make this happen? This is, I want to give credit here to Jack Daly. I listened to him recently and just brilliant. And one of the things he talks about is most sports teams are run better than most businesses. And there are 2 reasons why. And Jack calls out the playbook of the way we do things around here and practice. Do you practice? And most businesses, we don't practice. We go out and we try on the next customer, the next client, the next sales call, the next patient, instead of actually doing it together and getting better at it before we're on the playing field. So I don't consider all those other things practice. That's actually during the game. If we're only practicing during the game, are we going to be as good as our competition who's taking even a couple hours a week out to practice and get better at their craft, at their skill? And then if you have people that are doing an outstanding job beyond the sales team, as Jack likes to talk about, or you've got therapists, or you've got a wait staff, you've got somebody who's really at the top of their game, start figuring out what they do and write it down. Write it down. It's critical. So many businesses don't have their processes and stuff written down. And if you can start putting that stuff together, writing it down, then you have something you can start to practice, and then you have something that you can iterate upon and make better and better. And you keep testing it out, keep trying to improve it, and as you get better and better, and your company's the one that's practicing, what are you going to do to your competition and to the rest of the market? So Stephen Lynch was a former business coach of mine. He's now the CEO of Results.com. But I really wish that Stephen had shared this with us back in 2010 and 11 when we were working with him, but he hadn't quite gotten here yet. We worked together an awful lot on clarity, and one of my personal frustrations was that we were being abundantly clear, we'd set expectations, and people still weren't doing what they needed to do. And Stephen became very aware of that. He is very aware of that. And his quote is that successful business execution is 20% providing the clarity about what needs to get done, and 80% having a process or following up to make sure it actually happens. So I would suggest to you that it might even be 95-5. Okay, it depends on your business, depends on the people and the systems and what have you. And by saying it that way, I don't want the 5% to feel like it's not important. It's hugely important. You can't have accountabilities without having the clarity ahead of time. So it's foundational. It's really, really critical. But by itself, it really doesn't get you the results you need. So you have to have a process. You have to have a process in place to follow up and make sure stuff gets done. So, who has one-on-one meetings every week? If you think about that, do you have one-on-one, 2 people, your direct report and you, with every single employee every week? And I don't necessarily mean you with every employee, you with your direct reports. Do they have them with their direct reports? It depends on the size of your business. If you've got 7 to 10 employees, Vern Harnish would say that that's the team, and you could have one supervisor and they could run that. Vern has written the book called Scaling Up. He runs Gazelle's Coaching. Somebody who's really looked at all kinds of different businesses at different levels. If you've got 22 employees, then you may need a manager or two, so that you've got 2 or 3 people reporting to you, and each of them then has a team of 5 or 6 or what have you that they meet with. But the critical component is that you need to have the right number of people reporting to you, and it shouldn't really be more than 10. He talks about teams of 7 to 10 at any level in any business. But it's super important that you have regular meetings where you go over, let's see, what do you go over? Impactful meetings have 2 things. Okay, what do you think the 2 things are? So impactful meetings have objectives. There's a reason for having the meeting, and they have an agenda. Okay, they have an established agenda, and some of the objectives, by the way, let's think about that. Some of the objectives could be to establish and nurture the culture. It could be to drive results. It could be to manage projects. It could be to assess and learn by asking your employees questions. It could be facilitating understanding realizations by asking questions, or getting commitment to certain things. All these could be your objectives, but then your agenda must fit that. And I had a client ask me not very long ago, well, can we change the agenda around and keep it interesting? If the objectives do not change, and the agenda you've designed to achieve those objectives is effective, is helping you achieve those objectives, then why would you change it? Don't change it for variety's sake. If you've got objectives, and then you have an agenda that gets to those objectives. So one example would be if you're working on nurturing and recognition and fostering your culture, if you have each person tell a core value story about another individual in the organization each week, then you've started to build that culture. You're reinforcing those behaviors that you think are important, that you want to happen. And as you do that, you can then also ask, well, have you shared that with the person you just told me the story about? They go and then tell them. That starts to reinforce and recognize peer-to-peer and throughout the organization to really reinforce the values and behaviors that you want in the organization. That's an example of one agenda item that directly affects and can yield the objective that you want. If you're trying to push a project forward, then you want updates and information about that. If you want to monitor KPIs and metrics and how many phone calls a salesperson made, or how many patient visits a clinician made, or something, you have them report to you. That's a regular agenda item on your meetings or during your meetings. A meeting, and this is a critical component, a meeting without objectives, a meeting that doesn't have a clear purpose is called coffee. That's not a meeting. There's nothing wrong with it, but if your objective is to exchange information, that can be done in any number of ways, and that's not necessarily a results-focused objective. So really think through your objectives and the desired results that you want before you start to invest the time. The other thing to think about here, and this is Kyle. He owns the Batter's Box, the batting cages in the Presidio, and is one of my son's coaches and has worked with him on batting. But the reason to bring Kyle up here and the coaching idea is I see beginners in their meetings doing basically what I'm doing. Now I can't even listen to you, but they don't listen. They tell, they talk, they fill the space in the meeting. And I would suggest to you that you start thinking about how you do that and how you're doing that and whether you're asking enough questions. And my son was in the batting cages a little bit ago, and I was watching, and Kyle looked over at him and he just said, "Dude, what's your approach?" And he struggled and thought about it and didn't really come up with an answer immediately. And Kyle said, step out. Let the pitch go by, think about it. What's your approach? In other words, you're wasting your time if you haven't thought this through and planned it. But the brilliant thing that Kyle did was he asked the question. He didn't say, hey, do this. He didn't direct. He asked the question, hey, what's your approach? He made him think. And then he came up with an answer that was kind of, just trying to fill the space. It wasn't a good answer. It wasn't a real answer. It was like, oh, I'm doing that. And Kyle's like, no, you're not. You're going to do that anyway. You're going to pull the ball anyway. So think about your approach. And he's like, well, maybe I should be working on inside out. And he's like, yeah, your inside out approach. Reinforce the right answer. Yes, that's it. Think about that. You're going to make mistakes anyway. You're going to pull the ball anyway. But if you start thinking about an inside out approach and practicing that and all, and you're able to hit opposite field, you're going to get more hits by a percentage and, on and on. So anyway, that coaching, that challenging, that asking questions, that leading is a really important and critical skill that good coaches have. And when you're managing, think of yourself as the coach. Don't think of yourself so much as the director. Think about being a coach and facilitating and helping your team. The next time you're in a meeting and you're tempted to talk at or tell somebody what to do, I want you to think about this. Get the Jeopardy theme in your head and think about, okay, how can I turn this into a question? How can I flip it? This is super simple in concept. It's not easy to do. It's actually quite hard to do, and it takes a lot of practice. But if you'll be patient with yourself and consistently practice as well, and think about that, how can I turn this into a question? What question can I ask to help them get to the right answer? You're really going to be starting to empower your team, your people, the players, to think for themselves, to come up with their ideas, to figure out solutions, and to be able to do all that without being completely reliant upon you. And here's a couple questions you can start to think about. I call these the 3 magic questions. There's a great training over, if you want to go to that URL, the bit.ly/3 magic questions. By the way, it is case sensitive. We figured that out the hard way, but type it in that way. But the 3 magic questions. And that is on your update, or let's say someone didn't hit their numbers or didn't make the number of sales calls they're supposed to, or didn't sell the desserts, in the cafe or what have you. Just ask them, what happened? Okay, you want them to explain. You want them to think about it with you. Then what will you do over the next week to make it happen or make it different? And then finally, the third question, what resources or help do you need from me? What support do you need from me to succeed? So you've given them the opening to explain to you what happened. And what you don't want to accept is that it's everybody else's fault. You want some kind of ownership in the answer. You want them to start to take ownership and figure out, okay, well, what happened was I got busy and I didn't take enough sales calls and I didn't da-da-da. Or I was stressed out and I forgot and da-da-da. Whatever it is, right? And then, okay, what are you going to do over the next week? Well, I'm going to make sure I'm better organized in a calendar and schedule and, prioritize and ensure that I get this done before anything else. Okay, great. What resources or help do you need from me? And if the fax machine's broken or I don't have access to this or whatever, you can supply that. If they need some role playing and coaching, you can supply that. But ask them, what do they need? And if they're telling you I don't need anything and you come back to it next week and they're still not successful and you ask what happened, you see where we're going? We're trying to get them into the mode of being more independent and making sure that they're consistently doing all the things they need to do. And by the way, this applies to all those metrics we talked about in the beginning. Okay, so your visits per case, units per visit, sales per customer, value of each contract, all those things. What happened? Why is that number off? Why are we not achieving the goal? What are you going to do next week to make it happen? And what help do you need? What resources do you need from me? So let's talk about the cadence. You've got objectives, you've got an agenda. How often are you going to do these? How often are you going to meet? You're going to meet weekly. Remember we talked about that, mentioned it. On $1 million business with $81,000, by the way, increase in profit from having these regular meetings, this is your ROI, your return on investment calculation. Okay, what we're looking at with $1 million revenue in this type of if we're using the physical therapist business as an example, we probably got about 7 employees, full-time employees. Not clinical necessarily, that's about 3 to 4 clinical staff, and then front desk and billing and all the rest. So roughly 7 FTEs. Now, if you have a higher headcount, by the way, if you've got 4 part-time employees and you've got 11 employees or 9 employees to get to your 7 FTEs, each of those individuals, I want you to think about this for a second, for every individual, do you think they need the same amount of management time as a full-time employee? Okay, my favorite answer to this was this past week with a client of mine who said, well, yeah, they can screw things up just as bad as anybody else. And that's exactly the right answer. Even if they're only there 1 day a week, they can create a horrible experience for your customers, your patients, your clients. They can mess things up. They need to be following processes. They need to be following your playbook. They need to be practicing and be just as good as anybody else. So they take the same amount of investment and time investment from you or from one of your managers. And what we're carving out here for these meetings is about 30 minutes per employee per week. So if your 7 FTEs are 7 employees, that's 3.5 hours. If your 7 FTEs are 9 employees, that's 4.5 hours, or 11, 5.5. So think about your head count, how it affects your management. So right now, anybody, are you listening? You're freaking out? Freaking out a little bit? 30 minutes per employee per week, every week? Are you serious? How in the world am I going to do that? Why am I going to do that? I can't do that. I got to work. I got to see patients. I got to cook. I got to say, wait tables or do the cash register or write contracts or do more sales calls or whatever it is. Okay, bear with me a second. If you're spending, and again, we're using the PT practice as an example, but 30 minutes per week per employee, 3.5 hours a week, 46 weeks out of the year because you're going to take vacation and time off in the holidays and the rest of it too. That's 161 hours a year. Okay, that's a lot. It's 4 weeks of full-time work to manage your business. Okay, it's 4 weeks of full-time work to make $81,000. Okay, and most of the time it's doing the right work. And I want to call this out too. If you're doing these meetings on a regular basis, think about all the times in a week that you get interrupted. Think about all the times somebody pops into your office or catches you walking down the hall or whatever and says, hey, can we get, more toner for the printer or a new printer, or get this fixed, or can you talk to this client or this physician or this whoever? And do you always do it? Or are you stressing out? Is it taking you off your game? Are they interrupting you while you're working on things like this, presentations or strategy or management or bookkeeping or payroll or whatever? And how much time does it take you to get restarted on each thing where you get interrupted? How many distractions do you have? How many things are occupying your head and your time right now that you're thinking, oh my gosh, I got to go do that? If you have these meetings, a lot, if not all perhaps, but the vast majority of all those interruptions go away. Because think about that employee, they have your undivided attention. You're going to solve those problems. Part of your agenda is you're going to write stuff down, the action items, with due dates and who's going to do them. And then I can put that stuff on my calendar, or I can add it to my to-do list, and they can do the same thing. And we're going to make progress, and we're going to get stuff done by focusing on and making sure we agreed on an outcome, we solved the problem the best way we know how, we wrote it down, and we went forth and we did it. So this 30 minutes per employee per week, maybe it's 3.5 hours in this scenario. You're going to end up saving an hour to 2 hours, so you're not investing that much more time. You're going to save an hour to 2 hours a week in interruptions, and in most cases, you're actually going to save more than the 3.5 hours. And the interruptions and distractions and the things that pull you off task and all the time it takes you to get back, rolling and cruising on the thing that you were doing that you got interrupted on. Okay, so we're talking about more profit through managing people, weekly meetings, and I want to give you a dollar amount ROI as a final kicker. If you don't believe the time payoff is there or is enough, how about this? That $81,000 at 161 hours is $500 an hour. Now, if you've got other places where you can earn more than $500 an hour, then you should go do them and you should delegate the management. But if you're not getting paid $500 an hour to do the bookkeeping or to see patients or to do anything else, then how you can say, I don't need to have these meetings, I don't know. And I'm sure, by the way, that 90% of the people who are in the talk, that I give live, and 90% of the people who listen to this, if they get this far, are still not going to go do it. But this is one of the more impactful things that you can do for your business, for your bottom line, for your time savings, for your sanity, as well as just for your profit. Okay, this is $250 per meeting by driving your KPIs and the key metrics, plus you're taking time to recognize employees who are doing a good job, to nurture and build your culture, to reinforce your values, to identify problems early, to take some of those gotchas and ahas out that you find out about 3 weeks later in the current world, or a month and a half later that something's been happening. You can see this stuff, you find out about it, you can make changes and corrections much quicker, and you can also assess and reinforce morale because you're face to face with each of these people every week, you or somebody on your team. Now, last item here. I want you to avoid the one big mistake, and I've made this mistake and I've seen people do it, so I want to share with you the one big mistake that you can make after you've done all this. Okay, so we're going to use driving. I love driving analogies. Think about your attention and what you're doing when you're merging onto the freeway. You're accelerating, you're watching for other cars and traffic, you're making sure that you're not going to make contact with anybody else. You're merging in, you're paying attention to your gauges, lights on, blinker on, all that stuff. High attention level, right? Then as you cruise along, as you get through the merge and you're in normal traffic, do we start to lose focus? We start messing with the radio, or, God forbid, start texting or something. If we take our eyes off the road or our hands off the wheel, what happens? This is not the view you want at 75 miles an hour. Okay? And this is exactly what will happen if you take your hands off the wheel of your business. So once you're up to speed and you're running, and everything's great and you're happy, keep the cadence going. The beautiful part of it is your high performers and the regular cadence when things are working will be really easy. It'll be like driving down the freeway, until something happens, and then you'll have to deal with that. But most of the time, things will be good, and it'll be quick. And your highest performers, these 30-minute meetings that we blocked out, will end up taking 15 or 20. And you'll get out of them early, and they'll have free time to go do more stuff, and everything's going to be humming along. But if you don't have them, you're going to find yourself in this position. So please avoid the one big mistake and maintain the cadence and keep things going, because it's just as important to keep the business rolling and on the highway between the guardrails as it is to try to get it there in the first place. So here are a couple of things that you can get. These are free resources. Again, on my website, get the Meetings with Impact kit from Results, but go to bit.ly/impact meeting, impact MTG. This is case sensitive, so make sure you type that in, and you can get this kit, check out the questions, and also you can stay in touch with us at our Focus Forward Business Group over on Facebook if you like. But get those 3 magic questions as well, so you can share those with the team. And if you go to that link, there are some role playing and videos and all that you can access through results.com as well, and you can use that for training, for practice, and for your business. Thank you very, very much for listening and sticking through this whole thing. And if you need anything from me, get all my contact information over at sturdymckee.com.